This is A Diverse Life, the podcast in which we explore life in all its diversity. Hello and welcome to A Diverse Life podcast number 8. Today in this podcast I'm going to be speaking to Saul Hewish. Saul is the artistic director of Ride Out Arts for Rehabilitation, and as you may have guessed by that title, he does a lot of work in prisons, specifically arts in prison. Saul has been working in prisons for the past 30 years as an artist, doing theatre and other arts-based interventions with prisoners. Saul came over to my house, we sat down on my couch and we had a good chat. Just to let you know that my cat Mabel is also present for quite a lot of the interview, so occasionally you may hear some purring in the background. Hopefully that won't be too much of a distraction and perhaps will just add to the enjoyment of the process as you sit back, relax and listen to everything Saul has to say about his work in prison and particularly his recent project about prison food. We're here with Saul and also Mabel the cat. So if you hear Mabel the cat in the background purring or a little bell ringing, that's what it is. And Saul's been doing a fascinating project about prison food, which sounds completely bizarre, Saul. So where did you get? Where did that come from? How did that start?
Well, what happened was that I teach part-time at Warwick University, and I'd become aware of a project that was happening in the history department.
Okay. What department do you work in?
I work in the theatre studies department part-time, where I teach a second-year undergraduate module called Theatre in the Community. So what happened was that the history department, and particularly there's Professor Hilary Marland from Warwick University and Associate Professor Catherine Cox from University City Dublin, University College Dublin University.
Okay.
They are what's known as the joint lead investigators on a 5-year Wellcome Trust funded project, which has got a very catchy title, which is Prisoners' Medical Care and Entitlement to Health in England and Ireland 1850 to 2000. So it's quite a broad period of time.
Broad, yeah.
And what's been absolutely fantastic about this particular research programme is that they've been really interested in engaging artists to run a very wide array of different kinds of projects.
That's something the Wellcome Trust do, actually, isn't it? They like to sort of combine artists' creative approaches with scientific...
With science, yes, particularly.
Yeah.
And so some of the projects where they've commissioned they've commissioned people like Talking Birds and Fuel.
Talking Birds and Fuel are both excellent theatre companies. You should check them out.
So those are very much artist-led commissions to create pieces of work for general public. But they were also very keen to commission a piece of work which was prisoner-based or prison-based and was very much more participatory in practice. So I applied for the commission with an idea and I didn't get it. Which was a bit disappointing. But even more disappointing was that they gave it to a certain Geese Theatre company.
Geese Theatre have been touring prisons since 1986. They're probably one of the most well-known prison theatre companies. Oh, we know them.
So I was a bit annoyed about this.
Yeah.
So I wrote back to them and said, do you know what, I'm a bit disappointed. Partly because I think my idea is a really good idea, but also because you gave it to the company that I was a founder member and former director of. And then I also said to them, if I could persuade the prison that we were looking to go into, if I could persuade them to find a bit of money, could we still do my proposal, but maybe on a smaller scale?
I think people probably want to really know right now what your proposal was.
So the proposal was to one of the briefs, one of their areas of interest was food, prison food. Now,
That's a big conversation when you go into a prison, isn't
it absolutely is, and it's a kind of standard part of prison culture, which is to complain about the food.
Yeah.
So I'd had an idea which was partly stimulated by the fact that I had been doing some work with a company called B Arts in Stoke, where we had been combining theatre and food and cooking together. And so I'd been part of a couple of shows where all of those things happen in quite an extraordinary way. So essentially it's not just you come and get a meal as part of a show, but you come and you make part of your meal that then is cooked during the show. And the first show we did, which was called A Place at the Table, which was really partly a kind of cooking tutorial, partly stories about food, and also a polemic about food sustainability.
Yeah.
So I'd got this experience of using food and theatre, and thought, well, I could combine that in a prison setting, I think. And
B Arts are great, aren't they, in terms of that food has been a brilliant way of bringing people in. It's that basic common denominator.
It's an absolutely fundamental understanding that food is part of culture.
Yeah.
So often when people talk about culture, they think of kind of the arts, but actually culture is much broader than that. And that food, and particularly for B Arts, bread is an essential, a daily essential, and that grew from a lot of the work that they were doing with refugees, the sort of late 90s, early noughties,
right.
That they kind of really discovered that bread was a way that people would, come together and share stories and share experiences, and absolutely all of those things to do with bread. Yeah. So we've got that on the one hand. And then the other part of the inspiration was, many years ago, there was an Italian photographer who had gone into a number of low security Italian prisons to photograph the way in which men in prison were recreating their mama's recipes.
Oh wow!
And so there were these kind of improvised ovens, and then they had all the recipes, and it was all in Italian. And the only reason I knew about it is because Jamie Oliver had written something in the Guardian about it, and I just thought, and I was really taken by this. What a great idea! Yeah. And I'd always had this in the back of my head. So when this kind of commission came up, I thought, well, there's two things there. I'd maybe work with a photographer and go into a prison, take the photographer in there, and maybe we do something about food photography, because food photography is a lie. It's about deceit and all of those kind of things. Now that was part of the original idea. Whether we didn't in the end really go down that route, but that was the initial idea. Yeah. So essentially the idea is 3-week residency in a prison. As part of that, we explore historical resources in relation to prison food. So that's looking particularly at the dietary scales that prisons used to use. So for example, when in the sort of, I guess, with early part of the 19th century, prisons were pretty much unregulated. I mean, everyone did things slightly differently, but there was this notion that you get given food based on your sentence.
Oh wow! So the worse your sentence, the worse your food. Is that how that
works? It didn't quite work like that. In fact, they did it the other way around, which is really interesting. So it was done on and you had different classes of diet.
Right.
So class 1 is, everyone gets this. This is your first 7 days in prison, and pretty much it's bread and gruel.
Okay.
That's it.
So it's a very low nutrition diet.
Am I wrong in saying that? It's very high on carbohydrate, but no protein.
Right.
Then after 7 days, you move to class 2, which is like 7 to 21 days or something like that. And they would vary the amount. So the thing about this is that the amount of food that you were given was absolutely prescribed. So you would, maybe at class 2, you're now on to 24 ounces of bread a day and a pint and a half of gruel, or 2 pints of gruel. And then class 3 is your next, it's a bit longer. And then as the longer that you've been in prison, then they start to introduce other ingredients. So you might get a little bit of meat, you get a bit of potato every other day.
Any broccoli, green veg?
There's not a lot of broccoli in there in the 19th century.
Are you saying though that you're using this word class, which I know is just in terms of like the categorization.
Yeah.
But someone like, so what about Oscar Wilde when he was in? Would he have got a better diet than?
Well, Oscar Wilde was incarcerated towards the end of the 19th century.
Okay.
So by that time, what you've got a much greater standardisation across the prison system, and also they've introduced various different systems that they've tried. So in 1842, when they built Pentonville was the model prison.
Right, your typical Victorian jail.
And that is what a lot of the other Victorian jails were modelled on Pentonville. And that was originally built to facilitate the separate system. Right. Which was the silent system. It's essentially prisoners were not permitted to talk to any other prisoner. They were only allowed to talk to staff if they were talked to. The main point of contact that they had with people was probably with the chaplain, because it was all about essentially repenting for what you've done, and that silence was considered to be the way to do that. That backfired badly because people went nuts. People were going mad. Right. So literally their mental health deteriorated. Absolutely. And also people weren't, they were still talking to each other, they were finding ways to communicate, and so then what happens is...
Which sort of takes us back to whatever you do in a prison system, the prisoners will do something to, in some way, get underneath the rules. Because and so it's true with food.
Yeah, and so with the food's interesting because what's happening there is that... And as you look across, so the resources that we used include medical reports. So we were looking to see how food changed over time. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting, it was doctors who started to campaign for better food in prison, because what was happening was that they would run these really, really basic diets, and the food was terrible. Right. So because it's all done by weight, they used to do things like they'd put sawdust in the bread to kind of make it heavier. Okay. They'd use really low-grade quality ingredients. The meat often was kind of, rancid.
What was the motivator for that? Some sort of profit-based thing?
It was about saving money. Yeah, it was all about, if you can save the money.
Can you just, because I know we've talked about gruel a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll get to it in a minute, but something about what that is.
Gruel?
Yeah.
So gruel essentially is coarse oatmeal, water, and a bit of salt.
Okay.
So it's like a porridge, and that's where the term porridge comes from. Yeah. In terms of doing time, doing stir, or and it's. I think the oatmeal is the outside of the oat. So when you have your porridge and you've got your nice rolled oats and they absorb all the, and you probably have yours with milk, don't you, Ian?
I have it with oat milk.
Oat milk?
Yeah.
There you go. Well, that's sort of somewhere in between. That's extra oat.
Extra oat on top of your oat, yeah.
Whereas if you're Scottish, you have your oats with water. Don't you?
And
if
salt,
you're a soft southerner like me, you have it with milk and a bit of maple syrup. Yeah. But anyway...
Oh, that's like international kind of, yeah.
So the gruel was kind of standard. That was a standard fare. And actually, gruel is, in terms of it being quite it's quite good for you. But notions of nutrition are very, very ill-formed, certainly in the beginning of the 19th century. As time goes on, and it's very interesting to note that our understanding of nutrition and studies of nutrition, the first major studies were done on people in the army and people in prison.
Okay.
Because that was where you'd got a lot of people all in one place, and doctors started to make records.
And they could sort of guarantee.
So they started to see. So what? For example, one of the things was that by law, prisons had to ensure that a prisoner was the same weight when they left the prison as they were when they entered the prison.
Oh,
wow. And this approach of just giving everyone the same amounts, obviously doctors started to notice things. So, you get a kind of slight small man is gaining more weight, whereas the big guy is losing more weight more quick. There was an argument about actually we need to be a bit more responsive to different types of people and what they really need. But equally, going back to the doctors would certify whether someone was fit for labour, and particularly for hard labour. And people were getting sick, so they would go to the hospital. Now, when they went to the hospital, they would get extra food. So they might get a bit of cheese, right? Or they might get some vegetables or something like that. Yeah. And so the doctors started to notice that those people started to get better. Now, of course, what happened was that prisoners cottoned onto this, which was like, oh, well, if you get in the hospital, you get better food. Yeah, okay. So, of course, then you get people trying to blag that they've kind of, that they're sick or, Yeah. So there was a lot of feigning of illness in order to try and get into the hospitals. So by the time Oscar Wilde's in prison, I think generally the quality of food was starting to improve. The silent system was pretty much gone, and also hard labour by then is also starting to go on its way out. And it was partly Oscar Wilde's writings from Reading Jail that really led to the big campaign to get rid of hard labour and punitive labour.
So when you got into the prison, you took those resources, you talked about the history, and then what did you do?
We also did cooking. So we said to the guys that, so we had probably for each, we've done 3 of these. So we did 2 at HMP Huel, and we've done 1 at HMP Stafford.
Okay.
And we said we want to allow the prisoners to be able to cook and to replicate some of the Victorian recipes. So we did gruel.
Okay.
That was quite fun because we got them to make gruel as in the 1901 cookbook that we had a copy of, and then we also said, okay, now's your chance. You can pimp your gruel up. We'll give you some extra ingredients to see if you can make it a bit more palatable. And I think the one that was most popular was banana, peanut butter, and maybe a bit of extra syrup.
So quite different to gruel on its own. What was that reaction to gruel?
Some of them wouldn't even taste it.
Okay. No, I did see some that you made, and it's like it's a
like
liquid.
A paste.
Yeah, so just not particularly nice looking.
Yeah.
There's no sort of depth to it particularly.
No.
But what did that kind of get in terms of? I know when you're working with prisoners as well as doing the activity, you're always going to process that and facilitate conversations. What were the conversations that came up as they were thinking about
the
this
really
issue?
interesting conversations that we had were much more around food culture. So we talked a lot about now in prison and the kind of food you get now and how people survive in prison. So we talked a lot about in-cell cooking.
Right, yeah.
Kettle cooking.
Say a bit about that.
So prisoners will routinely supplement their diet with other food that they've bought from their canteen sheets.
Yeah.
So in prison you can earn wages. I mean, they're very, very low wages. On average, if you're working and you've got a decent job, you might be on £10, £12 a week. and then every week it's like a very sophisticated tuck shop. I mean, it's very sophisticated now. In the old days, it was a tuck shop.
Yeah.
So a lot of prisoners will buy extra noodles. They buy tuna. They buy various different. You can buy lots of spices. You can do all of these things. So in the first show, when we were creating the show, we obviously had the history, but we also did spoofs around TV cookery shows. So inevitably, instead of Master Chef, we had Pad Chef.
Your pad is your prison cell.
Okay. And it was all about kettle cooking, and you get 1 kettle recipes, 2 kettle recipes. One guy reckoned he'd got 3 kettle recipes, and they're cooking up soups. They're making curries. There's quite a lot of things. That they're very inventive.
Yeah.
And also there were the desserts. So in the show, the audience get to eat some of these foods. So they get to eat gruel. They get to eat the rather euphemistically entitled vegetable soup, which was mainly beef, I think. People got, what did we have? We had prison bread. So my friend Susan, who runs Bread in Common at B Arts, we gave her a 1901 prison recipe. So she made the bread, which involves a 14-hour overnight sponge, for those of you listening who are into your bread. I've got to say, that bread was considerably better than the kind of bread that the guys... So they made bread... Some of the men made bread in a contemporary prison recipe, and you make the whole thing, because they use all these provers, they use various preservatives and everything, you get these rolls which prove extremely quickly, but they're kind of really soft and they're sort of tasteless. And then we also gave them... I know one time we did tapioca. We got two of the guys demonstrated how to make a cell trifle.
Okay, take us through a cell trifle.
Well, I was a bit sceptical about this because I thought, it sounds really sweet. So what you do is you get Jamaican ginger cake, which is the new one that they do, which is extra sticky.
Yeah, so that's that red. Yeah, I know
the red one.
Yeah.
So you layer that on the bottom, and then you get banana. Thank you.
Yes, maybe. Yeah.
And then you pour on butterscotch flavoured Angel's Delight.
Wow.
And then crumble over some digestive biscuit on the top. Well, I've got to say, this thing is amazing.
Okay. I really hope some people listening make this.
It's really good.
Cool.
It's a really... And it's all made in a Quality Street plastic tub, It's whatever you can get to hand.
Okay. I do remember talking to prisoners about the kind of somebody was telling me they made a curry in their kettle.
Yes.
So this kettle cooking, could you just explain that to people?
So the kettle cooking. So the thing about cooking in kettles, and until I saw a guy. So we went and we photographed a guy doing some kettle cooking. So we do have a little publication which I can give you the link to.
Yeah,
so people can download that and see some of the photographs, and it's got some recipes in it.
We'll put that at the end of the show. Yeah.
It's not the old style kettles with a big element, because modern kettles all have flat bases, don't they?
Yes.
So what you do is you have a kettle that you keep just for boiling water, and then you have a second kettle that you use for cooking in.
How does one manage to acquire 2 kettles when living in a prison?
If you do it legitimately, you buy one off the canteen.
Oh, you can buy a kettle?
Yeah, so you get the prison issue one and then you can buy another one. Or if it's illegitimate, then you've just been acquiring your kettles from various places. Okay. And then you use all of boil in a bag rice and all of those sort of things that you can do. You've got your noodles, we've made salads.
It's brilliant, and I love the ingenuity of that. I love the fact that because I expect some people listening thinking, maybe prisoners shouldn't have these opportunities, or I don't know, but I think it's that creativity, that ingenuity that people have to use to get through life in prison, which I think we'd all do, to kind of just get that little bit extra, or to make your life feel worth living. That in the end, they're developing skills there, aren't they?
Absolutely. And also, I'll never forget the first time that I saw someone doing... This was a long time ago. I was working in a prison, and I think we were working on a project where it meant that we were doing evenings in the prison.
Right.
So it was just before they were getting to bang up for the night time.
Bang up is a phrase used by prisoners and prison staff for when they're locked into their cell at the end of the day or at any point during the day.
Yeah. And there were guys going off and to the boiler on the wing and filling up sort of buckets or containers and then throwing tins of beans and things like that into the water. And I was going, well, what are you doing there? He's going, oh, well, just throw it in there and then I'll leave it in there for about 15, 20 minutes and then it'll be vaguely warm by the time I get banged up.
So where did you get to at the end of that? So I know the guys spent a long period of time with you. They were improvising, they're making a performance, but they're also cooking and they're also learning.
And we had to do to make sure they got their health, food, hygiene certificates. We did all of that.
So there was a certificate process through this.
So they got their food hygiene certificate, and they also at Huel they did a nutrition qualification as well.
Right, great.
So we get to the end of the show, and so the shows were performed. Each show was performed twice. So we did one show in the morning for family members and invited guests, and then the afternoon performances were done to prisoners and prison staff.
Yep.
And then on the final session, we would have a final get together, and we got permission from the prison to bring in some special items for prisoners, so they could request something that they couldn't buy through the canteen sheet.
Yeah. So what did they choose?
Well, in the first cohort, it was a mix of things like somebody just wanted particular type of M&Ms. One guy wanted Belgian waffles, kettle crisps. And then there were the opposite who wanted, can you get me some skips? And snaps. Really cheap kind of service station kind of snacks. Yeah. When we did the second group, that was interesting because there was a slightly high level of, it was a different demographic, and so one of the guys said, could you get me some Cathedral City cheese? So I said, yeah, I can get you that. And as soon as they'd heard that I'd said, yeah, I can get you cheese, then it was like, oh, well, could you get me some Stilton?
Oh, very nice.
Could you get me some Applewood smoked cheddar? So there was a lot of cheese. The guys got wise to what was happening, and so they got together with Saul. 3 of us want to come in together. Can you get us a 12 box of Krispy Kreme donuts? So they did, and I was going, there's no way you're going to eat all of them. Getting them back on the wing, people are going to be attacking you for a donut. But there were some really interesting things that happened, and this is really where we start to look at what's the kind of impact. Why are we doing something like this? It's not just about giving prisoners opportunity to get some donuts. Alongside all of the I guess processes that go on when you're creating a piece of theatre, in terms of having to solve problems, having to work together, having to negotiate, having to be creative, having to use your imagination, working to a deadline, remembering, learning something and remembering to do it, performing, presenting yourself in front of an audience. So those are sort of some of the intrinsic values, I think, in terms of doing theatre in prison. And
there's creativity there, and that creativity is really inviting people to think outside of this environment, which I know men in prison can become incredibly focused on, and actually what's the future, what might it hold, how might I renegotiate my life after this sentence?
Absolutely, and so that's where we're getting further down into really starting to look at issues around your identity and core senses of self. This project was not the first time I've ever worked with a photographer, but it was the first time that I'd ever worked with a photographer who was then able, because of technology now, we got permission. We went back into the prison and we said, okay, you got permission to have 5. You can have up to 5 prints of these photos. And so we sat them down and we showed them like probably over 100 photos which were the whole part of the whole process. So there was them cooking, them doing drama, and then show pictures from the show.
Yeah.
And I made sure that within that mix there was a good mix of, I guess, sort of general activities, but also some really nice solo portrait shots of individuals that looked really great. And the photos that a lot of them wanted, and they wanted multiple copies, were the photos of the goofy team shots that we took at the end of the whole process. And it was so powerful that what they were saying was, we want the memory of this collective creative experience. That's really profound. And I don't know whether that has become more important as the crisis in the prison system has got worse. Because I said to them, well, you know, I mean, some of them didn't know each other before they came, but others did. And I said, but you kind of work together in the workshop. And they're going, yeah, but it's not the same.
The majority of prisons have work and education, and the workshops that Saul is referring to are where the prisoners will go and do work, often very menial labour.
No. Because in the workshop, you know, we're just packing bags, or we're doing this, and we're not working together on a creative activity. All of them talked about it reminding them that they were human beings. Prison, in the end, is an inherently it's a dehumanising experience, and in the worst prisons, it's a brutalising experience. And I think the role of the artist in that environment is to try and bring some of that humanity back in there, to remind people that they are people.
Mabel feels very strongly about arts in prison.
That they're capable of doing things, and they're capable of doing good things. That they're capable of using their imaginations to consider a different sense of who they are.
And actually, what you're saying about this choice, that these photographs that are most interesting are the ones where they're part of something, part of a community, part of a village, any of those things.
And it's part of something which is not criminal.
Not criminal. Yeah.
It's not criminal, you know? It might be it's about prison. I mean, you know, that's... and we can debate that. But, you know, that's what's really important, I think.
Okay, so I think that probably brings us kind of to the end of our time. Is there anything? So we're going to share that link at the end. Is there anything else?
There is an addendum, because we did these as 3 residencies about the history of prison food, and this year I've extended it. So we're doing a series of 3 additional residencies at Stafford Prison.
Great.
We've already done one which was a dance piece about the history of hard labour.
Okay.
In a couple of weeks I'm about to begin a puppetry piece which is about the history of adults with learning disabilities in the prison system, and looking at what was known as the weak-minded.
Okay.
And then the final one, which will be in November, is a choral piece which is about the history of conscientious objectors and their role in bringing about prison reform.
Brilliant. So I think we'll have to interview you about all of those ones as well. Okay. All right. Thanks very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Cheers. Wow, there was a lot of information in that interview. I hope you got the most out of it and really enjoyed listening to it. I certainly enjoyed conducting the interview and talking to Saul. So big thanks again to Saul for coming and joining us on the programme. So if you want to hear anything else about the project, there's a website link that you can go to, which is https:// Prison Health. That's HIST, prisonhealth.com. And also, there's a publication that goes along with it that you can read in more depth about the project, and that is https://issue, that's issuu.com/Saul Hewish 3//docs/past_time_book_DEC_2018. So if you've liked this show, then please do click the like button, share it, tell all your friends about it. And if you've got the time, please leave us a review, because that really pushes us up the rankings and more people will get to hear this story. If you've got a story to share or something you want to tell us about the show, you can get in touch via email at diverselifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us on Twitter and you can find us on Facebook. Thanks very much for listening. Goodbye. A Diverse Life podcast is a Workplace Diversity Solutions and Face Up co-production